The proudest man in Briar Creek was pounding on a door he had sworn he would never knock on. It was past midnight, and the rain came down in cold gray sheets. And Doctor Edmund Whitfield, the educated man, the respectable man, the man who had spent 3 years telling the whole town that Hannah Pell was a fraud and a danger, stood on her crooked little porch with his fist raised, soaked to the bone, his fine coat ruined, his voice cracking as he called her name into the storm. "Mrs. Pell, please, I'm begging you. My wife is dying." Inside, Hannah Pell set down her candle and looked at the door for a long moment. This was the man who had shut his door in her face when she'd had nowhere else to turn. The man who had called her a witch in front of the whole congregation. The man whose lies had cost her every friend she had left in the world. And now he stood out in the rain, begging. She could have left him there. The whole town would have understood if she had. Some of them later said they would have done exactly that. But Hannah Pell had learned long ago that what a person does when they are finally holding the upper hand is the only true measure of their soul. She opened the door. To understand that night, you have to go back to how Hannah Pell became the most feared and hated woman in a town that had once loved her. She had not always lived at the lonely end of the valley road. Once she'd had a husband, Daniel, a gentle wheelwright with sawdust always in his hair, and a snug house right in the heart of Briar Creek with geraniums in the window box. They had no children. That grief was its own quiet story, but they had each other, and that had been enough. Hannah carried a gift that had come down to her through her grandmother and her mother before that. She knew the healing ways. She knew which root brought down a fever and which leaf stopped a wound from turning sour. She knew how to turn a breech baby and ease a hard birth. She knew the patient, watchful nursing that pulls a body back from the edge when there is nothing left to do but sit through the long, dark hours and refuse to let go. For years, the women of Briar Creek had come to her quietly for their babies, their fevers, their troubles, and she had never once turned a soul away or asked a penny she wasn't freely given. Then Daniel died a chill that settled in his chest one winter and would not leave, and Hannah Pell's whole world went quiet. And around the same time, a new man came to Briar Creek and hung out a shingle on Main Street. Doctor Edmund Whitfield was a city-trained physician with a leather bag full of instruments and a high opinion of himself. He believed in his own learning the way other men believe in Scripture, and he believed that healing was a trade for educated gentlemen, not for grandmotherly women with baskets of dried herbs. From the moment he arrived, he saw Hannah Pell not as a neighbor, but as a rival. Every birth she attended, every fever she broke, was $1 out of Dr. Whitfield's pocket and a crack in his authority. So he set out, patiently and cruelly, to destroy her. He did it the way clever men do, their worst work, never with a fist, always with a whisper. He told the town her remedies were dangerous superstition. He hinted that when a patient of hers recovered it was luck, and when one of his own died, it was because Hannah had interfered. He used long words the farmers didn't understand and let them feel foolish for ever having trusted a mere widow with their lives. And then came the winter. The fever swept through Briar Creek, and a blacksmith's young apprentice lay burning and rattling, while Dr. Whitfield bled him and dosed him, and finally, gravely, told the family there was nothing more to be done to make their peace. Hannah Pell came that night, uninvited, because she had heard the boy was dying. She sat with him through 3 days. She did not leave, cooling the fever, spooning bitter teas between his lips, doing the slow, patient work the doctor had no stomach for. And on the 4th morning, the apprentice opened his eyes and asked for breakfast. The town should have carried Hannah Pell through the streets on their shoulders. Instead, Dr. Whitfield, humiliated, furious, stood up in the church that very Sunday and said, in his calm, educated voice, that it was unnatural for a woman to raise a body the doctor had given up for dead. Unnatural. The word did its work. In a frightened, superstitious frontier town, unnatural was a short walk from witch, and the rumor caught like dry grass. By spring, the women who had once knocked on Hannah's door now crossed the street to avoid her. Mothers pulled their children close when she passed. Someone painted a cruel word on her fence. The geraniums in her window box died, and she did not have the heart to replant them. And within the year, she had left her house in the heart of town and moved to the small crooked place at the lonely end of the valley road, where a woman the whole town had decided to fear could at least be left alone. The final cruelty came the following autumn. Hannah had taken a bad fall, hauling water, her wrist swollen and surely broken, the bone needing a doctor's setting that even she could not manage on her own arm. In real pain, she had swallowed her pride and walked the 2 miles into town to the one man who could help her. Dr. Whitfield met her at his door, looked at her ruined wrist, and smiled the cold smile of a man who has waited a long time for a moment like this. "I'm afraid I don't treat your kind, Mrs. Pell," he said. "Surely one of your magic potions can mend a wrist. Good day." And he shut the door in her face. Hannah set the bone herself that night, alone, by candlelight, weeping not from the pain of it, but from the loneliness, and her wrist never sat quite straight again. Every time the weather turned cold for the rest of her life, that crooked wrist would ache, and she would remember the sound of that door closing. She could have left Briar Creek then. There was nothing holding her. But Hannah Pell was stubborn in the deepest, gentlest way. She would not be driven out of the valley her Daniel was buried in by a man's small pride. So she stayed, and quietly, in the dark, she went on healing, slipping a tea to a sick child whose poor parents couldn't afford the doctor's fee, sitting up all night with an old man dying alone, helping a frightened young mother through a birth gone wrong, always coming and going by the back roads so no one would have to admit they'd called for her. The town hated her in daylight and needed her in the dark, and Hannah, who had every reason in the world to grow bitter, somehow did not. That was the woman Edmund Whitfield came begging to that rainy midnight. His wife, Catherine, was the great, soft secret of the proud doctor's heart. Everyone in Briar Creek knew he worshipped her. She was a kind, quiet woman who had never had a hard word for anyone who had, in truth, been gently ashamed of how her husband treated the widow at the end of the road, though she'd never had the courage to say so. And now Catherine Whitfield was burning with a childbed fever that had come on 3 days after their long-hoped-for hopes had ended in sorrow, and for all his city training, for all his instruments and his learning and his pride, Doctor Edmund Whitfield could not save her. He had bled her, and it made her weaker. He had dosed her, and the fever climbed. He had done everything his books told him to do, and his books were running out of pages, and the woman he loved more than his own life was slipping through his educated hands. He sat by her bed in the small hours, and he was no longer a proud man. He was just a terrified husband, and in his terror, a single thought surfaced that he had spent 3 years burying. There is one person in this valley who knows how to break a fever the books can't touch. It cost him everything he had ever believed about himself to stand up, take his coat, and walk out into the storm toward the lonely end of the valley road. Hannah Pell opened her door, and she saw at once that whatever else he was, the man on her porch was a husband watching his wife die. She did not make him grovel. She did not throw his cruelty in his face, though every word of it hung in the air between them. She simply reached for her shawl and her old basket of remedies and said, "Then we'd best not waste the night talking." She climbed into his buggy and rode back through the rain to the very house in the heart of town she'd once been driven from. What she found in that sick room would have made a lesser healer turn away. Catherine Whitfield was deep in the fever's grip, far past where most would have given up. But Hannah Pell had never once in her life given up on a body while there was breath still in it. She sent the doctor for clean water and willow bark and the few hard-to-find things she named. And to his credit, Edmund Whitfield, who had never in his life taken an order from anyone, ran to fetch them like a frightened boy. Hannah stripped away the heavy blankets his books had told him to pile on. She bathed the fever down instead of trapping it in. She spooned her bitter teas between Catherine's cracked lips, drop by patient drop. And then she did the thing no instrument in Whitfield's leather bag could do. She sat. Hour after hour through that long black night, she held Catherine's burning hand and talked to her low and steady, calling her back, refusing to let her drift, doing the slow, merciless work of simply not letting go. The doctor watched, and somewhere in those hours, the scales fell from his eyes. He saw that what this woman did was not magic and not superstition. It was knowledge, deeper than his own. It was patience he had never possessed. It was care, the one medicine he had never thought to put in his bag. Near dawn, the fever broke. Catherine Whitfield drew one long, clear breath, and her burning skin cooled under Hannah's hand, and she opened her eyes and looked up not at her husband, but at the careworn stranger sitting beside her, and whispered, "Thank you." Edmund Whitfield put his face in his hands and wept like a man being made over from the inside out. By the time the sun rose over Briar Creek, the whole town had heard that the doctor had ridden through the storm to fetch the very widow he'd called a witch, and that she had saved Catherine Whitfield's life when all his learning had failed. But the reckoning the town expected, the bitter triumph, the settling of scores, never came. Because the next Sunday, Doctor Edmund Whitfield stood up in the same church where he had once destroyed Hannah Pell's good name, and in a voice that shook, he told the truth. He told them what he had done out of pride and jealousy. He told them what Hannah had done out of nothing but mercy. He told them that the woman they had feared and shunned and slandered had saved his wife's life after he had slammed his door in her broken-wristed face, and that she had done it without one word of reproach. "I am a trained physician," he said, "and that woman knows more about healing than I will learn if I live to be 100. From this day, there is no patient in this valley I will treat without asking her counsel, and I will spend whatever years I have left trying to deserve the forgiveness she gave me before I ever asked for it." The church was very quiet. And then, one by one, the people of Briar Creek began to do the thing they should have done years before. They went to Hannah Pell, at first shamefaced, then warmly, and they welcomed her home. Catherine Whitfield, who owed Hannah her very life, became the truest friend the widow had ever had. The two women were inseparable in the years that followed, and it was Catherine who, one bright spring morning, showed up at the crooked house on the valley road with a basket of geranium cuttings and helped Hannah plant them in a brand new window box. Hannah Pell never moved back to the heart of town. She didn't need to. The town came to her now for their babies, their fevers, their troubles the way they always should have, and the doctor came too, and the two of them, the educated man and the gifted widow, made Briar Creek the healthiest valley in the whole territory. They had refused her, slandered her, and shut their doors against her. And when the proudest of them came begging in the rain, she had opened hers. Because Hannah Pell understood something the whole town had forgotten, that mercy isn't weakness, and forgiveness isn't surrender. They are the strongest things a broken heart can choose. And in the choosing, she had healed far more than one dying woman. She had healed the soul of an entire town,